I woke up with a throbbing headache in a corner of Orbidia Station's upper-level concourse, my body half-sprawled against a pile of empty cargo crates. Some passing aliens eyed me with mild curiosity, but nobody stopped to help. Typical. I'd come here hoping for a few easygoing days of exploring the vendor booths, maybe picking up some exotic snacks, then hopping on the next shuttle out. That was supposed to be my life. Carefree traveling, no strings attached. I certainly hadn't planned on whatever happened last night, and it definitely involved too many drinks. I ran a hand over my face, rubbing at my temples in a desperate attempt to banish the pulsating pain. Something rustled in my other hand. For the first time, I noticed I was clutching an odd-shaped ceremonial dagger, all gleaming silver filigree and swirling patterns that pulsed with tiny lights. My first thought was that I'd somehow bought it, possibly while drunk and trying to show off my non-existent knowledge of alien artifacts. My second thought was that I had zero recollection of paying for it or even negotiating with anyone. A gruff voice barked behind me. "You're awake, human!" I turned and found myself staring at a being almost twice my height, covered in heavy black armor. He had two short but menacing tusks protruding from his lower jaw, eyes that glowed a faint orange, and a posture that radiated authority. Recognizing the silhouette of a Varatu warrior, a race widely known for their prowess in battle and their strictly regimented culture, I scrambled to my feet and tried to appear less pathetic than I felt. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "Good morning, or midday, or, I have no clue what time it is." He pounded a fist against his chest, a gesture I vaguely recognized as some kind of formal greeting. "It is the hour after the 10th rotation," he said, which meant nothing to me. "You may call me General Varatu. I must say, you are an interesting choice, but if fate wills it, then so be it." "Choice for what?" I croaked. My mouth felt as dry as a desert planet's surface. Meanwhile, my head was spinning with questions. Why was a Varatu general talking to me, and what fate had to do with any of this? He laughed, a booming sound that drew the attention of half the station's passers-by. "You do not remember anything from last night's celebration?" I clutched the dagger more tightly, as though it might explain itself if I held it just right. I remember a few Varatu warriors inviting me for drinks. They seemed enthusiastic. Wanted to toast something. I thought it was a local festival." "Ah, you partook in the Ascendant's toast," General Varatu said with a satisfied nod, as though that explained everything. "You raised your cup to the luminous ancestors, accepted the ceremonial blade when it was offered, and pledged your vow before the Watchers." I blinked at him. "I pledged? My vow?" His gaze dropped pointedly to my wrist. I looked down and with a wave of horror noticed a faint, intricate marking etched there in shimmery blue ink. It was shaped like the swirling designs on the dagger. "Congratulations, Jace Martin," he said, with a grin wide enough to showcase his tusks. "You are now betrothed to our princess warrior, Auralia." "Betrothed?" The words slammed into my hungover brain so hard I thought I might pass out again. I shook my head, trying to connect the dots. Wait. I didn't sign up for any of that. I was just being polite. Going with the flow. You raised the blade of promise in front of witnesses. You drank to the ancestors' blessing. That is the oldest tradition of the Varatu. There is no going back. I took a step back, reflexively scanning for the quickest escape route. The station's concourse was bustling with travelers, reptilian merchants lugging crates of rare spices, a few aquatic species in sealed hover tanks, and the ever-present peddlers hawking knickknacks. If I sprinted, maybe I could vanish in the crowd, but something told me outrunning a Varatu general was not exactly feasible. "You can't just declare me engaged," I argued. I'm not even from around here, and I'm not planning on staying on Orbidia." General Varatu shrugged, unbothered. "The vow is made. If you wish to break it, you must present yourself to the Royal Council of Varth and petition for nullification. However, Be warned that nullification is not a simple matter. Often, it involves trial by combat. Of course it does, I muttered under my breath, because your people can't do anything without beating the snot out of someone, apparently. He narrowed his eyes, but didn't deny it. Now, if you will come with me, I will bring you to Auralia. She is curious to meet the one who so boldly accepted the blade of promise. I could feel a hysterical laugh building in my throat. Curiosity was definitely a word for it. More likely she wanted to wring my neck for messing up her day. Yet the alternative seemed to be fleeing blindly, which wouldn't fix the fact that I had this mystical mark on my wrist. Something told me the Veratu took their rituals very seriously. "All right," I said, swallowing hard. "Lead the way, General." He turned and strode off, and I hurried after him, trying not to trip over my own feet. As we passed through the crowds, I couldn't help but notice every Veratu warrior we encountered gave me long, measuring looks. Some of them smirked, some looked perplexed, and a few snorted in amusement. It felt like walking naked through a coliseum. My heart hammered in my chest as I wondered who Auralia was. A princess warrior. Probably tall, imposing, definitely not someone to cross. My track record with relationships was basically zero. I'd never stuck around anywhere long enough to make deep connections. All I did was hop from station to station, never letting people expect anything from me. Now apparently I was locked into an engagement with a whole different species. I tried to keep panic from overwhelming me. Maybe it would all blow over somehow. Maybe Auralia would see I was a worthless candidate and have me kicked out. That might be humiliating, but at least it wouldn't involve me stumbling into mortal combat. We reached a large docking bay that had been converted into a makeshift Veratu enclave. Banners hung from the rafters, depicting stylized tusks and swirling blade symbols. Rows of heavy metal crates formed a perimeter. The air smelled like overheated electronics and strong incense. In the center stood a group of Veratu warriors in formation, and at their head stood the woman who must have been Auralia. She was tall, easily a foot taller than me, and wore an ornate breastplate marked with swirling runes. Beneath the armor, her muscles were unmistakable. Her hair, or what passed for it among the Veratu, was braided with thin metallic cords. A black cloak with silver trim draped across her broad shoulders, and her golden eyes pinned me in place the moment I stepped into view. "General Veratu," she said in a low, commanding tone. "You have brought the human." "Yes, Princess Auralia," he replied, pounding his fist to his chest again. "He was resting in the upper concourse." She eyed me like I was a piece of defective equipment. "So, the brave soul who lifted the blade of promise. You look smaller than I expected." "I get that a lot," I mumbled. My mouth felt suddenly dry again. She took a slow step forward, scanning me head to toe. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" "I was just being polite," I said, helpless. "I thought you were celebrating something." I raised my glass like everyone else. Her jaw tightened. "Such ignorance." "Still, the vow has been made. Whether you intended it or not, you are now part of our sacred tradition." I could see the flicker of frustration in her eyes. Maybe she hadn't wanted this either. If it was a matter of politics or family expectation, she might be as stuck as I was. That realization gave me a sliver of hope. Maybe we could find a loophole together. "Look," I ventured, "maybe there's a clause, a legal technicality, something that says if I was intoxicated or not informed, we could—" She raised a hand, and I shut my mouth. "It is not that simple. If you break the vow, you insult my house." Insults are answered with either reparation or combat. The reparation can be quite steep, a life of servitude, perhaps. That is, if the council is feeling merciful. I felt myself go pale. Auralia gave me a moment to digest that before she spoke again. "Alternatively, you can remain in the engagement, pass the required trials, and become my consort in truth." Pass the trials, become her consort. My head spun. On the one hand, forced marriage to a towering alien warrior was not high on my bucket list. On the other hand, mortal combat or indentured servitude was probably worse. I said, I guess. I guess I'll try not to get myself killed. Her lips twitched, maybe almost a smirk. A wise decision. General, take him to the quarters. He will need rest before training. Training? The word rattled around in my mind as the general led me away. My plan to stay a few days on Orbidia had mutated into something entirely different. I clutched that ceremonial dagger like a lifeline, fighting the urge to fling it away. Because throwing it away probably would have been the biggest insult of all. The next morning, I found myself in a cramped set of guest quarters that smelled like steel and incense. I slept fitfully on a bunk that felt more like a slab of granite. I'd half convinced myself this was all a hallucination. But no, the mark on my wrist glowed faintly in the dim light, and the sounds from outside, clanging metal, barking commands, stomping boots, reminded me the Varatu were making themselves at home here on Orb. With a heavy sigh, I dragged myself up, rummaged for a moment in my travel bag only to realize half my stuff had gone missing in the prior night's debacle, and wandered into the corridor. Immediately I was intercepted by a stern-faced Varatu guard who escorted me to an open training area set up in the station's cargo hold. Auralia was there in a simpler set of armor plates, stretching her arms and rolling her shoulders as if preparing for a workout. When she saw me, she gave a curt nod. Good. You're awake? We begin now. I eyed the group of Varatu warriors moving through drills, their forms crisp and powerful. Begin what, exactly? Your training, she said, as if it were obvious. If you are to survive the upcoming trials, you must develop at least some competence. My gut churned. Okay, so what happens in these trials? She gestured for me to stand beside her, then placed a carved wooden staff in my hands. Each trial tests a different facet: endurance, skill in combat, cunning in the hunt, and loyalty to the clan. Succeeding does not necessarily mean you must overpower your opponent. There are ways to prove yourself without raw might, but you must show heart. I gave a weak laugh. I'm full of heart, sure, absolutely brimming with it. Aurelia's gaze flickered over me. We shall see. Now, try to strike me with that staff. The next 15 minutes were a brutal lesson in just how out of shape I was. Every time I swung, she dodged with infuriating ease. She barely even moved her feet, merely shifting her torso, and I'd stumble forward. Once I tried a lunge I'd seen in some old holo movie. She easily stepped aside and tapped me sharply on the back with her own staff, sending me sprawling. I lay there groaning. You do realize I'm not cut out for this? She offered a hand, her expression neutral. Reluctantly, I took it, letting her hoist me to my feet as if I weighed nothing. You will learn, she said, no room for argument in her tone, or you will fail. But we do not have the luxury of waiting. The council expects you to complete the first test within 2 cycles. Great, I mumbled. And if I fail, that means? Likely you will become fodder for the beasts in the Carassian jungle, she said flatly. Then she paused, noticing my horrified expression. You do not have to do this alone, but the vow states that your own will must be part of it. If I fight the entire time on your behalf, the vow is meaningless. So I have to prove I'm worth marrying. Or die, she shrugged. Essentially, yes. My entire body slumped. I was used to skipping out of anything that got complicated, but there was no skipping this. Not with that mark on my wrist. Not with an entire culture's tradition breathing down my neck. We trained until my arms screamed and my legs threatened to buckle. Auralia was relentless. It was clear she had no respect for my physical abilities. Yet occasionally she gave small pointers that helped me avoid the same mistakes. Once or twice she actually looked faintly amused when I tried to crack a joke, though she rarely responded. By the end of the session, I collapsed in a corner, gasping for breath. Auralia simply folded her arms. Rest. Tomorrow we go to Carassian jungle for your first trial. Jungle? My eyes widened. Wait, as in, like actually fighting alien beasts? Her eyes glinted with a hint of predatory excitement. You must prove your courage in the hunt. Normally, the betrothed engages in a symbolic chase, subduing a lesser creature. But you have awakened the interest of the council. They want to see how well you fare against something more formidable. Wow, me? I grumbled. I'm no one special. They find it amusing that a clueless drifter stumbled into one of our oldest rituals. The council likes entertainment. A wave of dread tightened my stomach. But Auralia gave no sign of pity. She merely turned and walked away. I stared after her, 1,000 questions spinning in my head. This was insane. Yet, for all my complaints, I realized I was still here, still going along with it. There was something oddly magnetic about Auralia and her unyielding determination, something that made me want to see if I could measure up, if only to wipe the smirk off the faces of every Varatu who thought me a joke. That night I slept fitfully again, imagining monstrous creatures and hearing the roar of alien beasts echo in my dreams. When morning came, I was roused by another guard, this one even more serious, who escorted me to an old cargo shuttle. Inside waited Auralia, along with 6 warriors, all armed to the teeth. She tossed me a battered chest plate and a short blade. "Suit up," she instructed, "though it may not help much if something tries to chew on you." "Terrific, you're such a comforting presence," I muttered, buckling the plate around my torso. It was heavier than it looked, and I almost fell over adjusting its weight. The shuttle door closed with a clang, and we took off, heading for the small forest moon orbiting near Orbidia Station. According to Auralia, the Carassian jungle was dense, humid, and home to an apex predator called the Vraka. The Vraka apparently boasted razor-sharp spines, extremely keen senses, and a mouthful of venomous fangs. My job was to track one and bring back proof that I faced it, or not die, I murmured. "That'd be nice too." Auralia actually gave a small snort. "Stay alive, if you can." We landed in a clearing choked with vegetation. A thick canopy loomed overhead, letting in only sparse shafts of sunlight. The air was heavy with moisture and the ground squelched underfoot. Vines thicker than my arm hung from twisted branches. I could hear alien insects buzzing and chirping in the distance. "Your trial begins here," Auralia announced, stepping off the shuttle ramp. The other warriors followed, forming a loose circle around me. "The council wishes for an authentic test, but they have allowed me to observe to ensure you do not die immediately." "Well, that's sweet of them," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. A warrior handed me a small tracking beacon. "Activate this if you manage to slay the Vraka or if you are in mortal danger," he said. "Though if you do not manage to press it before the beast tears you apart, well," he shrugged. I wanted to fling the beacon at his head. Instead, I stuffed it into my belt, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Go," Auralia said simply, pointing to a narrow trail that cut into the jungle's depths. I cast her one last glance, half expecting some sign of support or encouragement. Instead, I got her usual stony stare. Then again, maybe the faintest flicker of concern crossed her face. Hard to say in the dim light. With nothing else to do, I clutched my short blade and trudged into the undergrowth. Leaves slapped against my face and the muddy ground sucked at my boots. Every step felt like it might be my last. My mind raced with potential strategies. Hide, wait for the creature to appear, then stab it? That seems suicidal. Maybe I could climb a tree, try to outsmart it? But I had no rope, and these massive vines looked about as stable as rotten ropes. The deeper I went, the heavier the silence became. Only the soft hum of insects accompanied me. The thick air made me sweat almost instantly. I forced myself to keep moving, scanning for footprints or spines or anything that might indicate a Vraka's presence. Then I heard a low, rumbling growl. My heart jumped into my throat. Slowly I inched forward and peered through a curtain of moss. Beyond it was a small clearing. In the center lay a creature roughly the size of a small speeder bike, covered in black and blue scales that gleamed with a faint bioluminescence. Spines jutted from its back, curving wickedly. It had a long snout with 2 sets of fangs. I swallowed hard. Definitely a Vraka. It was gnawing on some unfortunate smaller animal. The stench of blood hit my nostrils, making me gag. This was madness. I had no illusions that I could outfight it in direct combat. But maybe if I was careful or used my wits. I could wound it enough to scare it off, or collect a trophy. I remembered Auralia's words, "You must show heart." Well, if heart meant ignoring every self-preservation instinct, sure. Taking a slow breath, I scanned the clearing for a vantage point. There was a twisted log near the creature, half-rotted, that might provide partial cover if I could slip behind it. I crouched low, quietly creeping around the perimeter, stepping as gently as I could on the damp earth. My plan was simple enough. Get close, throw something to distract it, and then try to strike, maybe sever a spine or slice its tail. But halfway around, I accidentally snapped a dry stick under my boot. The Vraka's head shot up and it locked its glowing orange eyes on me. My heart nearly stopped. In a fraction of a second it launched itself forward. I barely had time to dive aside before it crashed into the spot I'd been standing. Its spine scraped the trunk of a wide tree, sending bark flying. I let out a strangled yelp, scrambling backward. The Vraka spun around with shocking agility, hissing, its fangs dripping saliva. I could see my terrified reflection in its eyes. Mustering what little courage I had, I slashed wildly with my short blade. The Vraka twisted, and my blade glanced off its scales with a metallic clank. A tiny chip might have come off, but the beast hardly seemed hindered. It lunged again, forcing me to roll across the muddy ground. I gasped, caking my arms in filth. "Focus!" a voice barked from somewhere behind me. It sounded like Auralia's. Maybe she was close enough to see me flailing. Focus? Yes, sure. Easy. The Vraka lunged once more, giving me no time to think. I pivoted and darted behind the rotted log. The creature slammed into the other side, splintering wood in a deafening crack. I cringed, bits of bark raining on my head. If it kept this up, the log would be nothing but mulch. Then I remembered the short message one of the warriors had told me. A Vraka's underbelly is softer. That is your only chance. Great. So I had to get under it somehow, preferably without being impaled. Seizing the moment, I crawled under the shattered log, moving on my hands and knees through wet moss. The beast snarled and climbed atop the wood, searching for me. I could see its claws digging into the bark overhead. My heart thundered as I inched forward, the stench of rot filling my nostrils. Suddenly the log collapsed from the Vraka's weight. I flung myself out the side, narrowly avoiding being crushed. The creature snarled and lunged again, but I managed to sidestep. Its tail whipped around, catching me in the ribs, and pain exploded through my torso as I was knocked to the ground. Gasping, I rolled onto my back, seeing spots in my vision. The Vraka loomed overhead, fangs bared. I had mere seconds to act. Summoning every ounce of defiant stupidity in my soul, I thrust the blade upward. By sheer dumb luck, the Vraka had lowered its body enough that the blade sank into a gap in its scales near the chest. It screeched, thrashing violently, and blackish blood sprayed across my face. I gagged but held tight to the hilt. The beast yanked itself backward, wrenching the blade from my grip. It staggered, hissing in agony, then spun around and bounded away, crashing through the foliage. For a moment I could only lie there, covered in blood and mud, half sure I was about to die from an unseen bite. But the jungle went silent again. The Vraka had fled, presumably to nurse its wound. I lay there trembling, my ribs on fire, my head swimming. A rush of disbelief swirled in my mind. I was alive! I hadn't killed it, but I'd driven it off. Somewhere on the outskirts of the clearing, branches parted and Auralia stepped into view. She approached slowly, scanning for signs of the Vraka. When she saw it was gone, she marched to my side, arms folded, expression stony. "Get up," she said. I groaned, wiping the blackish blood from my eyes. "That's all you have to say?" Her gaze flicked across my injuries. "You survived? That is commendable." I choked out a laugh, though it sounded more like a wheeze. "Thanks. So, do I pass, or do you need the beast's head?" she sniffed. "The council will likely require a trophy, but they will also accept that you drew blood and forced it to retreat, with a single blade no less. The first trial is completed enough. You proved you can face mortal danger and not run." I pushed myself up, ignoring the pain. If running had been an option, I would have taken it, but I guess it wasn't. Her eyes lingered on me. That is something we must work on. You rely too heavily on luck and desperation. Next time, you may not be so fortunate. I staggered to my feet, my knees threatening to give out. So, there's going to be a next time? One corner of her mouth twitched. Indeed. The first trial is done. Others remain. I wanted to cry or laugh, or possibly both. Instead, I coughed, spitting out black gore. The rest of the Varatu warriors emerged from the tree line, wearing expressions of mild surprise. It seemed I'd defied their expectations by not dying. Over the next 2 days, I found myself subjected to an endless cycle of training. Auralia was a relentless teacher, drilling me in basic self-defense, agility, and even the fundamentals of Varatu blade forms. My muscles burned constantly, and new bruises formed every time I attempted a stance incorrectly. But gradually I stopped tripping over my own feet. I learned how to roll with a fall instead of landing on my face. I even managed to disarm one of the lesser warriors in a sparring match, though I suspected he'd let me do it. Between the sessions, I caught fleeting moments of conversation with Auralia. She was still distant, but occasionally she'd mention her obligations to the royal house. She admitted the council insisted on a proper mate for her to strengthen alliances. Her father, a high-ranking lord, had pressured her to find a match. You ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time, she told me curtly, or the right place, depending on your perspective. Had you not been so eager to toast with us, I would be matched with a more worthy candidate. Wow, I said, feigning offense. Glad I could ruin your big plans? She snorted softly. I had no desire for a political union, but you are an odd alternative. I found that strangely comforting. At least she wasn't thrilled about being forced into a vow with a random human. We were both stuck in this. But maybe, if we worked together, we could get through the trials with minimal bloodshed. The second trial was a group exercise in which I was tested on my ability to coordinate with Auralia. We were thrown into an old cargo bay filled with shifting platforms, blazing torches, and mechanical drones that spat stun charges. The objective was to reach the far end as a unified pair, disabling every drone along the way. This forced me and Auralia to actually communicate. She called out positions of the drones. I ducked and weaved, occasionally tossing her a stun spear. She used her near-superhuman reflexes to slice or smash the drones. At one point, a platform gave way under my feet, and I nearly fell to the cargo bay floor far below, but she caught my arm in a vice-like grip. Focus, she snapped, hauling me back up. Thanks, I panted, my heart thudding in my throat. I'm focusing, I swear. Despite a few close calls, we made it to the far end. Even the official overseeing the trial looked grudgingly impressed. Auralia nodded once, then strode off without another word. I sat there, catching my breath, torn between relief and annoyance at her abruptness. Days stretched into a week. I trained, I survived, I occasionally ate half-decent meals in the Varatu camp. The bruise on my ribs slowly faded from deep purple to a sickly yellow. All the while, the council loomed in the background, waiting for the final trials, particularly the culminating event known as the Rite of Proving. Word on the station was that it would be a grand spectacle, complete with onlookers from various allied systems. My impending humiliation or potential triumph was apparently a source of entertainment for half the station. One evening, after a rigorous training session, Auralia and I found ourselves in a corner of the camp. I was struggling to remove a set of practice armor that had pinched my shoulder. She watched me with an inscrutable expression, arms folded. You no longer flinch at every blow, she remarked. Thanks, I said, prying off a stubborn gauntlet. And you haven't tried to chop my head off once today. Progress. She considered that. You're no warrior by birth, but you adapt quickly. It's useful, I offered a half grin. Useful enough to actually pass these trials? She didn't answer directly. The Rite of Proving demands more than just skill. The council will look for your resolve and your willingness to stand by our ways. They wish to know if you will shame our house. I tried to ignore the sting of that last phrase. So they don't trust me, great. Also, do you trust me? Auralia's gaze flickered. She said nothing for a moment, then turned to leave. At the threshold of the corridor, she paused. I trust that you won't willingly let yourself be killed. A weird pang of disappointment hit me. I wasn't entirely sure why I craved her approval. Maybe it was the daily bruising, the near-death experiences. Maybe it was that she was the first person in a long time who didn't write me off as just a drifting nobody. She expected me to step up or die trying, and a small part of me respected that. Finally, the day of the rite of proving arrived. The cargo hold we'd used for training had been transformed into a makeshift arena. Spectators lined the walkways above, mostly Varatu warriors, but also curious travelers from other species. Banners fluttered in the recycled air, and torches flickered, casting dancing shadows across the metal walls. I stood in one corner of the arena, wearing the best armor they had to fit me. It was still too heavy, but at least I could move. Across the way, Auralia joined the council members on a raised platform, her expression severe. She wore her ornate breastplate and carried a ceremonial spear. My pulse pounded as I awaited instructions. Then a Varatu elder with elaborate tattoos stepped forward, raising his arms. "We gather for the rite of proving," he announced. "The human Jace Martin has passed the preliminary trials. Now he must show his worth in the final test. Should he succeed, the union bond with Princess Auralia stands. Should he fail," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Failure had its own grim consequences. An ominous clang echoed as two massive doors at the far end of the arena slid open. Out slithered a metallic beast at least 8 feet tall and shaped somewhat like a giant scorpion, though it walked on 4 segmented legs and had mechanical pincers. A Varatu engineering marvel, perhaps. Sparks crackled around its limbs, and it let out a shrill, grating screech, as if to say it was ready to tear me apart. I swallowed hard. A partially mechanical monstrosity was not what I had in mind. The council apparently believed in forging a test that combined the cunning of technology with the ferocity of beast-like design. My eyes darted to Auralia, but her face betrayed nothing. The elder raised his arms again, signifying the start. The mechanical creature lunged forward with unnerving speed. I rolled to one side, nearly getting clipped by a crackling pincer. Focus, I told myself, ignoring the pounding of my heart. I needed a plan. The thing was definitely stronger and more durable than I was. Maybe I could spot a weak joint or a control panel. It scuttled at me again, pincers snapping, forcing me to duck behind a metal column. Sparks bit into the column, leaving scorch marks. At least I knew it used some electrical discharge. If I let it grab me, I'd be fried. I sidestepped, scanning its body. I saw an exposed coil near its back leg that glowed with energy. That might be a power source. If I could damage it, maybe the entire contraption would shut down. The beast lunged once more. This time I tried to bait it, feinting toward one side. As it swiped with the pincer, I dove underneath, sliding on the floor as I slashed at that glowing coil. My blade clanged off the metal armor, only nicking the coil. Sparks flew, but not enough to disable it. It screeched again, swiveling to face me, tail lashing out. The tail was a multi-jointed metal stinger that pulsed with electricity. I flung myself back, but the tip grazed my chest plate, sending a painful jolt through my body. My vision blurred for a second, and I almost dropped my blade. I staggered, determined not to let it finish me off. Come on, Jace, think. Maybe I could lure it into smashing itself against the arena walls. Or if I got it to ram that pincer into a power conduit. Above, the crowd murmured. I heard a few mocking laughs. Clearly I wasn't wowing them so far. My cheeks burned. Glancing up at the platform, I locked eyes with Auralia. She didn't cheer or scowl. She simply stared, her golden gaze fierce. I recalled her saying the council wants to see my resolve. That meant not just surviving, but fighting back with everything I had. Taking a shaky breath, I ran to the edge of the arena where a set of columns formed a partial obstacle course. The mechanical creature charged after me, metal claws scraping the floor. I ducked behind one column, letting it smash into the structure. Sparks rained, and for a moment I hoped the impact might cripple it, but the creature simply yanked its limbs free and continued after me. We danced this way for a tense few minutes, me trying to land a solid blow on that coil while it battered columns into rubble. My lungs burned from sprinting, and my arms ached every time I swung the blade. I managed to scratch the coil 2 more times, each attempt sending a shower of sparks. It was flickering now, which meant I was close, but I was running out of stamina. One bad step and I'd be pinned beneath a metal pincer. The creature pinned me near the center of the arena, forcing me to stand my ground. I slashed at its face, some cluster of sensors, maybe an optical array, but it twisted, deflecting with its pincers. Electricity crackled again and the tail jabbed toward me. I barely parried with my blade, the shock dancing up my arms, numbing my hands. I hissed in pain, seeing black spots at the edge of my vision. My grip was slipping. The creature reared back, preparing a final strike that would either crush or electrocute me. I had only one chance. Gritting my teeth, I rushed forward, ignoring every survival instinct screaming at me to run. At the last second, I dropped into a baseball slide, skidding between its front legs. The tail slammed down, crackling inches from my face. My momentum carried me under the belly, where I saw the glowing coil on the back leg. With a desperate cry, I plunged my blade into the coil, twisting it with all my might. A blinding flash erupted. The creature screeched a static-laden shriek, stumbling to the side. My blade snapped from the force, leaving the hilt in my hands. I rolled clear, gasping for breath. The mechanical beast twitched, sparks dancing across its body. Then it collapsed in a heap of grinding metal. For a few seconds I lay there, heart hammering. Then I realized the roaring noise in my ears was actually the crowd cheering. I sat up, dazed, letting the broken hilt drop from my limp fingers. The adrenaline still coursed through my veins, making my limbs shake. I'd done it. Somehow I hadn't died, and that thing was beaten. A ceremonial gong sounded, and the Varatu elder stepped forward, raising his arms. The rite of proving is complete. Jace Martin has triumphed over the Guardian construct. The vow stands. The crowd erupted into applause, or at least the Varatu version of it, which involved chest thumping and guttural shouts. I stumbled to my feet, scarcely believing it. I turned my head toward the platform. Auralia was no longer there. Instead, she was striding across the arena, spear in hand, cloak trailing behind her. She halted a few feet from me, gaze intense. I tried to read her expression. Pride, annoyance, relief. Her voice was low. "You have proven yourself a fighter. Perhaps not a polished warrior, but you have heart. Today you bring honor, not shame." I nodded, swallowing hard. "So, what now?" She slid the spear onto her back, then reached out and gripped my wrist, raising it so the crowd could see the swirling mark. "Now, the bond is recognized by the Council and the Ancestors. We honor it." My throat tightened. A swirl of conflicting emotions flooded me. Disbelief, exhaustion, a strange sense of triumph, and, unexpectedly, gratitude. Somewhere along this journey, I'd stopped thinking only about escaping and started thinking about living up to the challenge. The elder proclaimed the formal acceptance of our union. Another Varatu banged the gong again, and the onlookers started chanting in unison, some ancient phrase that resonated through the arena's steel walls. Auralia let my wrist go, her eyes never leaving mine. "You have the freedom to leave if you so desire, but if you stay..." I realized with something akin to surprise that I did want to stay, or at least I wasn't desperate to bolt at the first opportunity. The notion startled me. Jace Martin, the man who never stuck around? But everything had changed. Maybe I was still insane, but I'd faced down alien beasts, mechanical nightmares, and a culture of warriors, and in the process discovered something more valuable than a quick escape. "Princess Auralia," I said, managing a shaky grin, If you'll have me, I'd like to see what happens next." She studied me a moment, then gave a curt nod. "I think I can live with that." The next hour was a blur of celebration. Well, a Varatu-style celebration, which involved a lot of roaring, stomping, and strong beverages that I wisely avoided after my last fiasco. General Varatu clapped me on the back so hard I almost choked. Warriors saluted me, some jokingly offering training tips. It felt surreal. Eventually, I found a quiet corner to catch my breath. Auralia joined me, removing her heavier armor plates. She folded her arms. "You should rest. Tomorrow you continue training." I laughed wearily. "Didn't I just prove everything?" She arched a brow. "Marriage is not a single test. It's a continuous one, at least for my people." "Of course it is," I said with a wry grin. "Better get used to it, I guess." She regarded me silently. Then her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You fought bravely," she said. "I did not expect it of you." There was a warmth in her tone I hadn't heard before. I'm pretty sure I surprised myself, too. We stood there, the crowd's celebrations a distant rumble, the flickering torchlight reflecting in Auralia's golden eyes. Our union might have been an accident, but it no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it felt like a beginning. Maybe an insane beginning, but one worth exploring. "I was a bachelor yesterday," I murmured half to myself. "Now I'm apparently the husband of an alien warrior princess." Auralia's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Fate is strange." She offered me a flask of some Varatu brew. I hesitated, then chuckled and lifted it, mindful not to chug. "To fate," I said, taking a small sip. It burned like fire, but there was a sweetness underneath. I coughed, handing it back to her. She drank more steadily, unflinching. Then we stood side by side, looking out at the raucous crowd. The festivities might have been overwhelming, but for once, I felt at peace. This bizarre alliance had tested me in ways I never expected. Maybe there was still more to face, politics, battles, personal differences, but I was done running from everything. In that moment, feeling the bruises on my body and the glow of the vow mark on my wrist, I realized something. I was exactly where I needed to be. Maybe not forever, who could predict forever, but certainly for now. My old life of drifting station to station felt shallow compared to the sense of purpose that flickered here. With Auralia and her unyielding determination, I exhaled a quiet laugh. "Guess we're stuck with each other," I said. She shrugged, though there was a glint of amusement in her eyes. "There are worse fates." I allowed myself a genuine smile. "Yeah, there definitely are." I closed my eyes just for a moment, letting the voices of the Varatu wash over me, letting the distant hum of Orbitia's machinery fade into the background. Tonight, I'd celebrate. Tomorrow, I'd step fully into this new life, and if that meant more training, more insane trials, more near-death moments with alien beasts, well, I'd deal with it. Because for the first time in ages, I wasn't running. I was home, in the strangest sense of the word, and I intended to stay. Carla Morton stood on the weather-beaten observation deck of the Mountain View Atmospheric Station. The early morning sunlight touched the peaks in the distance, painting their snowy caps in brilliant shades of gold. She lifted her binoculars, scanning the skies for any trace of the strange lights that had been reported for the last few days. Though many chalked it up to meteors or natural phenomena, Carla's work in atmospheric science told her something else was happening. There was a pattern to these sightings, steady, repetitive, moving in ways that natural objects rarely did. Word of these lights had circulated throughout various research communities, but official announcements were thin. It was too close to her own field of study for her to ignore, so she had dedicated hours each night tracking them with precise instruments. Her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She glanced at it, feeling a spark of apprehension. Only a handful of people called her at this hour. "Carla," she answered, tucking her binoculars under one arm. "You're up early," said the familiar voice of General Marcus Taggart. "I just received your data packet. The thermal signatures you recorded near the southwestern desert look artificial. It's not normal meteor activity." Carla exhaled, gaze flicking toward the horizon. I was worried about that. Any chance it's advanced military tech from Earth? Taggart paused. We don't have anything that maneuvers like that. Satellites have confirmed multiple objects descending at controlled angles. They're not from any agency on this planet. We're keeping it quiet until we have a better handle on the situation, but I'll need you in the capital tomorrow morning for a briefing. Carla's stomach knotted. A mixture of fear and fascination mingled in her mind. I'll be there, she said. She ended the call leaning on the railing, letting the crisp mountain air fill her lungs. The day was just beginning, and with it the potential discovery of something beyond her wildest imagination. Less than 24 hours later, Carla found herself inside a secure conference room deep beneath a government complex. The overhead lights were bright, reflecting off the polished table at which a dozen specialists sat. Alongside atmospheric researchers like Carla, there were individuals from fields such as biology, geology, astrophysics, and the military. General Taggart led the briefing from the head of the table. He cleared his throat, tapping a holographic projector that brought up images of faint white streaks in the night sky. We have confirmation that several unidentified objects, at least 3, have landed in remote parts of the world. A desert region, a high-altitude mountainous area, and an icy zone near either the Arctic or Antarctic Circle. Our satellites picked up signs of advanced propulsion. The descent pattern shows controlled flight. These aren't random. One of the astrophysicists shifted uneasily in her chair. Are they trying to contact us? Taggart shook his head. No attempts at communication have been detected. So far, it appears they're setting up some kind of equipment. Observational data suggests specialized structures being erected, though we can't get close enough to see details. Airspace around these sites has become hazardous. Our drones either lose signal or are shot down. We suspect a defensive perimeter. Carla frowned. If they're not reaching out, it might mean they don't want to negotiate. So, what's their purpose? We're not sure, Taggart said. We suspect resource acquisition or an attempt to establish a base of operations. This could be an invasion, or at least a prelude to it. We want to be ready. The gravity of the situation weighed on everyone in the room. People took rapid notes, asked pointed questions, and pored over the images projected on the walls. For Carla, the strangest part was how each landing site correlated to extreme environments. If these extraterrestrials, Ozians, as some in the intelligence community labeled them, were as advanced as they seemed, why risk setting down in conditions hostile to human habitation? Something about that choice spoke of confidence, perhaps even arrogance. Or maybe it was strategic brilliance. Her thoughts were interrupted when Taggart wrapped up the briefing. I need volunteers. We're sending a small team to investigate the desert landing site, gather intel, and evaluate potential hazards. You'll be accompanied by a military escort, but we don't want to provoke them with a large presence. Dr. Morton, your atmospheric expertise will be critical there. Carla swallowed, the significance of the mission hitting her. Understood, General. I'll do my best. Within 2 days, Carla boarded a military helicopter bound for a remote desert outpost. It was midday when they landed, and the sweltering heat blasted her the moment the door slid open. The helicopter's rotors kicked up a flurry of sand, grit stinging her face. Captain Elliot, leader of the escort detail, beckoned her behind a rocky escarpment where they had a rudimentary observation post set up. Through high-power binoculars, Carla got her first glimpse of an Erasion landing site. A sleek, dark vessel stood on the sand, half buried by dunes. The wind had begun to form around it. Several figures moved about, clad in reflective suits that seemed designed to handle scorching desert sunlight. They reminded her vaguely of deep-sea divers, as if they needed total insulation from the outside environment. The strangest structures were spire-like towers glowing faintly at their tips. She counted 4 of them in a rough circle around the vessel. One of the nearby soldiers muttered, "They've been messing with the sand. We see them scanning the ground like they're looking for something. A few hours ago, they set up those weird towers." Carla zoomed in, focusing on the Arizons themselves. They were humanoid, bipedal, with limbs proportionate to an adult human, but their suits covered every inch of flesh, including their faces. She watched them trudge across the sand with labored steps. The motion struck her as odd. At midday temperatures that soared above 50 degrees Celsius, these alien suits might not be holding up as well as intended. One figure stumbled, dropping to one knee. Another rushed over, adjusting something on the first one's back. "They don't look comfortable," Carla whispered, "or as unassailable as we might have feared." Captain Elliot pointed further out. "We tried approaching yesterday, but a drone was knocked from the sky, presumably by a directed energy weapon. We haven't dared get closer since." Carla studied the shimmering heat haze. If these beings were so technologically advanced, why did they appear to suffer from the environment? She found herself recalling historical expeditions, like early polar explorers or desert explorers, who were undone not by direct enemy fire, but by the unforgiving brutality of nature itself. Could it be that these aliens, for all their advanced flight technology, were vulnerable to Earth's climate? Back at camp that evening, Carla analyzed the sensor data her team had gathered. Infrared readings of the Arazions showed spikes in body temperature that climbed alarmingly high during peak midday heat. One file displayed time-lapse footage, an Arazion scout walking across the dunes around noon. Each minute, body heat increased. By minute 30, the figure was moving sluggishly. By minute 40, it collapsed, only to be dragged away by companions. Carla felt her pulse quicken. This was more than a small detail. It might be a glaring weakness. She emailed the findings to General Taggart. Hours later, she received a reply that a similar pattern was observed at a high-altitude site. The Arisians there, while well-insulated, suffered from oxygen deprivation and sub-freezing winds. Reportedly, half their landing party had to return to their ship for pressurized oxygen assistance. Something clicked for Carla. These beings might have biology specialized for an environment that was stable or narrow in its climate range. Earth's, on the other hand, had extremes that no single suit could handle without continuous modification. News arrived from other corners of the planet. In the polar regions, a separate Aretzion craft was discovered. They had set up structures near the ice, possibly mining for fresh water or some mineral. But with wind chills plunging to minus 30 or 40, the alien suits malfunctioned. Some sightings suggested entire squads of Aretzions retreating to their vessels. Their technology was formidable. They had laser-based weaponry and advanced scanning devices, but none of that stopped the freezing cold from penetrating their gear. Carla was called back to the capital within a week. This time the briefing included more details, gleaned from new satellite observations. Not only were the Arazians struggling in these environments, but they were rolling out new constructions, rectangular domes with built-in climate control systems. Each dome enveloped a few kilometers in a faint translucent barrier that moderated temperature, humidity, and possibly atmospheric pressure. Surveillance footage showed the alien patrols moving more confidently inside these artificial bubbles, as though the climate matched their homeworld standards. "We can't let them stabilize," Taggart declared, voice echoing in the war room. "If they manage to build enough of these climate-controlled zones, they'll no longer be at a disadvantage." One of the climatologists noted, "The planet's natural variation is a significant factor in our favor. If we remove that advantage, their superior technology might give them free rein." Taggart turned to Carla. "You've been on the ground in the desert. You've seen how they react to the heat. Any ideas on how we might exploit it without provoking an all-out assault by them?" Carla pursed her lips. "Well, they need stable conditions. We can't just sit back and watch them create them. We might consider targeted strikes, perhaps sabotage their climate regulators. But we must be tactical. They've shot down our drones." The general nodded. "Precisely. We need small teams who understand the local terrain to lure them or force them deeper into harsh conditions. On a bigger scale, we can't mount a typical military offensive. We'd lose if it came down to a straightforward exchange of fire." That day, an unusual alliance of scientists, local guides, and specialized military units was formed. Some were desert tribespeople intimately familiar with the dunes and scorching sun. Others were Sherpa teams from the Himalayas who had spent decades at life-threatening altitudes. Arctic explorers with knowledge of sub-zero survival joined the fray. They were all briefed on one fundamental premise: Earth's environment itself was the best defense. Each region would adopt strategies tailored to local conditions, attacking the Arisians indirectly through nature's fury. In the desert sector, Carla returned with a small infiltration team. Their mission: gather more data on the climate domes the Arizonians were constructing and, if possible, sabotage them. Under cover of darkness, when the desert cooled to more tolerable levels, the team crept toward the perimeter of a newly built dome. At night, the temperature differential at the boundary was stark. Inside the dome, sensors read a mild 23 degrees Celsius. Outside, in the natural desert night, it was close to freezing. The abrupt shift created condensation and localized fog around the dome's edge, the perfect cover for Carla's group. They observed the base's alien guards patrolling in pairs. Each guard wore a reinforced suit that glowed faintly along the seams. Now the suits looked heavier, more advanced. Perhaps the Arisians were learning from their initial failures. That realization alarmed Carla. A single guard walked unsteadily, pausing to adjust a valve-like mechanism on the back of the suit. She wondered if the repeated expansions and contractions of Earth's day-night cycle still strained their gear. She turned to Luis, a desert tracker on her team. "Can we manipulate the dunes so that the boundary storms intensify? Maybe we can funnel the wind where they've set up those towers." Luis nodded thoughtfully. "We do something similar to protect certain oases, construct small barriers that redirect sand-laden winds. If we raise a temporary berm on that side, we might ramp up the wind shear near their dome and cause structural damage." They spent hours setting up rudimentary barriers in the darkness, using the natural slope of the terrain to guide the desert wind. With each passing minute, Carla's heart hammered, expecting a watchful alien sensor to spot them. But the Arisians seemed oblivious, preoccupied with calibrating their climate system. By dawn, the desert wind picked up, swirling around the artificial bubble. Particles of sand clashed with the dome's protective field, causing arcs of energy to crackle. The field flickered at one corner. Even from a distance, Carla saw the agitation among the Arzion guards. They ran around, presumably trying to restore stable conditions. While this was happening, similar tactics were being employed in the mountains. High-altitude teams used localized pressure modulation devices, small, portable machines that generated standing waves in the thin air. These machines didn't create storms from nothing, but they disturbed the local airflow enough to drive already thin oxygen levels even lower in a localized region. ASEAN squads patrolling ridges found themselves gasping for breath. Some collapsed without a single shot fired. The advantage was subtle but deadly. News poured in of Arisian frustration. They established more climate domes, but each time specialized teams found ways to sabotage or overwhelm those domes using the planet's natural challenges. Meanwhile, high above, the Arisian command ship, which rarely descended, monitored the ground operations. Carla and Taggart began to suspect that the real threat would come once the Arisians established a chain of fully stable zones. Then they could mass their forces. With each day, the scale of the conflict grew more urgent. Eventually, Carla found herself traveling to yet another clandestine summit, this time in an underground facility in the Swiss Alps. Representatives from over a dozen nations attended, each speaking of the successes and failures of their local engagements. Their short-range victories were overshadowed by the looming possibility that the Arisianians would adapt faster than humans could sabotage them. An older man in mountaineering gear, introduced as Tenzing, cleared his throat. "In the Himalayas, we rely on shifting weather patterns, but the aliens are creating more robust suits. They've improved their oxygen systems. It's only a matter of time before they can handle the altitude, no matter what we do." "They're determined to terraform our planet," Carla said, hooking a thumb toward the digital map on the wall. "We have evidence they've begun constructing something bigger at the primary command site in Central Asia, possibly a large power source to fuel the climate domes." A French climatologist added, "Winter is coming in the Northern Hemisphere. That means massive temperature swings. If we plan carefully, we can time major assaults to coincide with extreme cold snaps or storms. This is, after all, our planet. General Taggart placed both hands on the table. Agreed. We propose launching a globally coordinated operation in about 1 month, just as seasonal changes intensify. We'll strike every known dome or installation simultaneously, forcing them to spread thin. Each local team uses knowledge of its climate to tip the balance. Meanwhile, we'll target their central command site, presumably the biggest climate modification node. The plan would require unprecedented coordination. All participants recognized it was the best shot at halting the Oresians before they overcame Earth's environmental defenses. Carla felt a renewed surge of determination. This was more than science or curiosity, this was survival. The planet was rallying, from desert dwellers to polar explorers. But the Oresians were not idle. Their leader on the ground, Commander Zalox, accelerated efforts to protect each climate-controlled zone. Under Zalox's orders, squads of Oresian engineers set up massive towers that hummed with energy, each feeding into a central atmospheric processor in their main command base. The idea was simple in principle. If they created enough stable bubbles, they could link them together, eventually establishing a broad corridor of safe environment. Once that corridor was complete, the Oresians' main fighting force could march across Earth as if it were their own home planet. Inside the Oresion main base, tensions simmered. Zalox's second-in-command, a scientist named Zeran, worried about the feasibility of forcibly transforming an entire planet's climate. Day after day, Zeran saw reports of Oresion soldiers collapsing from heat exhaustion, altitude sickness, or even the humidity of Earth's rainforests. The planet was simply too diverse. Yet Zalox insisted they double down, funneling resources into bigger, bolder climate domes. Zeran confronted him one evening in a corridor illuminated by harsh fluorescent tubes. "Commander," Zeran began, voice low, "our calculations suggest Earth has microclimates we haven't even accounted for. Even if we moderate temperature, the atmospheric pressure changes from region to region. Our suits can't handle the short-term extremes, let alone local storms." Zalox's eyes glinted with unwavering confidence. "We've conquered other worlds. Their climates were also challenging. Our empire stands because we bend hostile environments to our will. Earth is no different." "But Earth is different," Zeran persisted. "Its inhabitants have centuries, millennia of experience living in these conditions. They know how to use the planet's variations against us. The more we try to manipulate it, the more chaotic the boundary effects become." Zalox's lips curled in contempt. "You overthink, Zeran. Our technology is centuries ahead of theirs. When the time comes, we will forcibly unify these pockets of stable climate. Let the humans have their dunes and storms. It won't matter once our grid is complete." Zeran bowed his head, stepping aside to let Zalox pass, but inside he felt a growing sense of dread. Through his research, he had glimpsed just how adaptable humans could be and how unyielding Earth's natural forces were. He suspected that the Empire's hubris might be leading them all to ruin. With the month drawing to a close, the day of humanity's grand plan arrived. It was timed with the shifting of seasons in the Northern Hemisphere, specifically a transition period that promised sudden cold snaps in mountainous and temperate regions, heavy rainfall in certain tropical zones, and savage dust storms in deserts. Each sabotage team prepared to strike, waiting for the local moment when the environment turned most unfriendly to an unprepared visitor. In the desert, Carla and her team mobilized at dawn. Over the weeks, they had perfected a method to direct sand-laden winds right at the Oresian dome's edge, intensifying the destructive interface. As morning light spread across the dunes, Carla watched the horizon. The air shimmered like molten glass. Soon, powerful gusts began to blow in from the east. They had identified wind patterns that converged near the Oresian with carefully placed barriers and some newly designed wind amplifiers that harnessed differences in air pressure. They aimed to create a localized sandstorm. "Stand by," Carla whispered into her radio. Her heart thumped. If they miscalculated, it could blow the entire plan. She gave the signal, and the amplifiers hummed quietly. Within minutes, the wind grew from a steady gale to a maelstrom of swirling sand. Visibility plummeted to near zero. The storm hammered the dome's boundary, sending arcs of energy dancing along its surface. Carla's instruments picked up a spike in the Oretzian power grid as they struggled to maintain stable conditions inside. Over comms, she heard anxious voices, some local, some from other teams scattered around the globe, reporting similar undertakings. The Himalayas erupted in violent blizzards. Some of this was natural weather on the cusp of winter, but human teams had placed reflectors on glaciers to redirect sunlight, accelerating temperature shifts and destabilizing pockets of warmer air near the Eurasian installations. The resulting differential triggered fierce storms that battered alien outposts with sub-zero winds. Eurasians who ventured outside their climate domes swiftly succumbed to frostbite or oxygen starvation. In tropical jungles, squads used small charges to blow out thick canopies at strategic points, letting in blasts of superheated midday air that collided with cooler pockets created by the aliens. This collision triggered thunderstorms that soaked the aliens' electronics, shorting delicate equipment. Everywhere, the environment itself seemed to rise up in furious retaliation. During the chaos, Carla's team advanced on foot through swirling dust, wearing goggles and protective scarves. Their objective was to plant electromagnetic disruptors near the dome's main power relay. If successful, the dome would flicker or even shut down, forcing the aliens into direct contact with the desert's savage storm. The group approached a cluster of glowing cables half buried in the sand. A single Aresian guard spotted them, leveling a sleek weapon that emitted a humming whine. But the swirling dust made precise aim impossible, and Carla's group fired off a series of shots from rifles modified with alien salvage. The Aresian's protective field crackled, failing for a split second, allowing a bullet to find a gap in the suit. The guard toppled. The team rushed forward. Carla swiftly placed the disruptor against the largest cable. She pressed a button, feeling a jolt of static electricity in the air. A wave of energy pulsed outward, and the faint glow of the dome intensified, then dimmed, then intensified again. The swirling sand battered its edges. Finally, the barrier collapsed with a sharp hiss. Sand poured in, burying the carefully controlled interior in minutes. Through the dusty haze, Carla glimpsed Arizosans scrambling, some ripping off failing suits, others collapsing under heat stress. The sabotage had worked. At the same time, similar success stories emerged from the mountains, polar regions, and rainforests. Reports trickled in. Climate domes offline, main power cores destroyed, or outposts abandoned. But the final test lay at the primary command center, hidden in a moderate climate zone where the Arisians had established their biggest atmospheric processor. That was where General Taggart and a specialized strike force converged. They took advantage of an approaching cold front to launch an attack, dropping in from helicopters during the first onslaught of freezing winds. Commander Zalox, in his command facility, watched in horror as one status report after another showed catastrophic failures. With the outer network of domes compromised, the centralized project to unify them was futile. The conflict was short but brutal. Oretzian troopers, weighed down by newly upgraded suits, found themselves incapable of adjusting to the sudden temperature drop. Taggart's squads moved in, planting charges on key structural supports of the giant atmospheric processor. As the device blew apart, the artificially maintained environment around the command center vanished, letting Earth's weather in. The result was chaotic. Storm winds battered the facility, exposing the Aresians to the very elements they had tried to tame. Felix tried to rally his forces. "Divert power from the ship. We can still salvage the main processor if—" He paused, noticing cracks in the walls and the swirling gusts that whistled through newly formed gaps. The facility was failing, and so was the entire operation. Reluctantly, he made the call he had never expected to make. "All units, return to orbit. Prepare for full evacuation." The Arisians had never anticipated that an entire planet's environment would stand against them. They had known advanced weaponry, but not advanced weather. Zeron watched the meltdown with a conflicted mix of relief and sorrow. In the final days, he had quietly fed intel to humans, particularly to Carla's team, because he couldn't stand watching the Empire ruin itself by refusing to understand Earth. At times, he had tried to warn Zolox that subjugating a planet was different from subjugating a small territory, but the commander's pride had run too deep. From a vantage point on a crag near the command center, Carla and a small reconnaissance group witnessed alien ships lighting up the sky once more, this time ascending rather than descending. It was a surreal sight. Beams of light searching the ground for survivors, then pulling them upward into the massive vessels overhead. In a matter of hours, most of the Eresians had vanished back into space, leaving behind a scattering of broken domes, twisted metal, and wreckage that once promised unstoppable conquest. Back in the capital, celebrations were hushed, tinged with awe and uncertainty. The threat had abated, but no one knew if the Arishans might return with an even larger armada. For now, Earth's victory owed to its enormous environmental variety and the human ability to weaponize it. Carla found herself recruited to a high-level research initiative that studied leftover alien technology. The question of how the Aresians had traveled light years remained an enticing mystery, though overshadowed by Earth's own immediate concerns. She visited one of the deserted dome sites in the desert a month later. Much of the wreckage was being collected for analysis. The once smooth alien panels were scoured by sand and battered by scorching sun. The memory of seeing Aresian warriors collapsing under the midday heat haunted her. That a civilization capable of interstellar flight could be undone by a desert's blistering temperature underscored how little they truly understood about the worlds they sought to dominate. Late that evening, Carla stepped beyond the perimeter of the dome wreckage to watch the sunset, a flaming orb sinking behind the dunes. She pictured the Eresians' arrogance. They had expected an easy conquest, assuming their advanced technology rendered them invincible. They never anticipated that Earth's greatest protector was the planet's own untamed diversity. She drew a deep breath, tasting the dry desert air. In that quiet moment, she realized just how magnificently fierce life on Earth could be. 2 weeks passed, and a small number of Eresians were found stranded. Some, such as the group commanded by a junior officer, had refused or failed to reach the transport ship in time. One of them was a battered figure named Sarek. His suit had partially melted in a sandstorm. The salvage team that found him reported that he was near death from heat stroke and dehydration. Military medics stabilized him in a quarantined facility. Interrogations revealed that he, like Zuran, had begun to question the Empire's approach to conquest, but Zalox had not listened. Now Sarek's destiny hinged on the mercy of the very species his people had tried to subjugate. General Taggart spearheaded an initiative to keep these captured Aresians in a specially designed habitat near a Swiss laboratory. Carla, along with other scientists, visited to exchange knowledge. The environment had to be carefully controlled, ironically not unlike the climate domes the Aresians themselves had built. But this time it was for survival, not domination. Sarek was still too weak to move about, but in halting English, learned with surprising speed, he expressed regret. "We studied many worlds," he said, voice raspy. "None had climates so changeable. We believed one atmosphere was much like another, that our suits and domes would suffice. We were wrong." Carlos stepped closer to the glass partition separating them. "Earth isn't always kind even to us," she replied. "Our ancestors learned to live in deserts, mountains, and icy poles through millennia of trial, error, and adaptation. You can't replicate that in weeks or months, no matter how advanced your technology." Sarek's eyes, pale beneath the overhead fluorescence, blinked. "Are you going to punish me?" "I don't make those decisions," Carla said softly. "But I think we should try to learn from each other. We could both gain something from mutual respect rather than aggression." Across the corridor, Ziran worked with a group of human scientists, bridging the gap in knowledge. His technical expertise provided clarity on how the Aurasians' climate domes functioned, while the humans shared insights into Earth's atmospheric processes. They might never become allies on a grand scale, but there was hope that the leftover animosity could yield to curiosity and cooperation, at least among those open-minded enough to see the futility of conquest. New concerns surfaced. The Aurasians had given Earth a glimpse of how vulnerable an entire species could be to the variety and intensity of a planet's ecosystems. Taggart convened a meeting telling Carla and a global panel of leaders that Earth must prepare. The Aurasians might decide to return with even better technology, or another interstellar civilization might take an interest in us. We have to remain unified in our defense. Carla thought back to all the local groups she had worked with, the desert trackers, the mountain climbers, the polar researchers. Individuals from vastly different backgrounds had banded together to protect Earth. That sense of global unity, rarely seen in peacetime, was a silver lining to the entire ordeal. As far as humankind was concerned, this had been a conflict that transcended borders and differences. The entire species fought for home. Meanwhile, the environment itself had begun to recover from the disruptions. In the desert, leftover cables and transmitter panels were quickly swallowed by shifting sands. In mountainous regions, battered outposts were covered by snowfall, erasing the scars of alien presence within a few storms. In the polar regions, the ice groaned and refroze, burying any trace of Aurasian operations. While the conflict had left some scars on Earth, the planet's natural processes continued their ancient rhythms, quietly resilient. Carla returned to her vantage point at the Mountain View Atmospheric Station one final time before moving on to new duties. In her mind, she replayed the entire arc of events, from spotting the mysterious lights in the sky to witnessing the destruction of the largest atmospheric processor near the end. The aliens had arrived like gods from the stars, only to be beaten back not by human laser cannons or starships, but by deserts, storms, thin air, and searing heat. She remembered seeing an Aurasian soldier tremble at altitudes normal people climbed for sport, or one battered by the noonday sun. They had been so certain they were unstoppable. Yet Earth had proven them wrong. She watched as the sun set behind the high peaks. A breeze brushed across her face, sending a ripple through the pine trees. The entire planet felt alive, a sleeping giant that had awakened only briefly to remind interstellar travelers that it was no passive sphere. If the Aurasians were wise, they would never forget this lesson. In Carla's heart, there was a sense of pride, but also humility. Humans had triumphed here because of their synergy with Earth, but they could not grow complacent. Who knew what else lurked in the cosmos, watching, waiting? As darkness settled, she thought again of Commander Zalax, presumably somewhere aboard a distant flagship, bearing the shame of a failed conquest. Perhaps he now understood the folly of underestimating a living planet, or perhaps he plotted revenge. Either way, Earth had shown itself unyielding and versatile. The thought was both reassuring and sobering. She packed her things at the station, reflecting on how her life had changed. She had gone from a researcher quietly gathering data on climate patterns to a crucial strategist in a global defense. The knowledge she gained would guide new generations of scientists and military leaders, ensuring that Earth would not be so easily caught off guard again. The planet's greatest shields were the extremes of its own nature, and the people who had learned, over countless generations, to exist in harmony with that nature. Far below, in the valleys, lights twinkled, revealing small towns and roads. Carla smiled to herself, imagining families who might not fully appreciate the magnitude of what had transpired. It was better that way. They could enjoy another peaceful evening without fear of an alien invasion. Meanwhile, she and others at the highest levels would remain vigilant. She said a quiet goodbye to the station that had been her home, stepping inside to finalize her departure. On the table in the main monitoring room lay printouts of heat signatures and atmospheric readings, relics of the frantic days when she first suspected the visitors were not from Earth. Outside, the wind sighed in the pines, as though acknowledging all that had passed. That same night, in the Swiss lab, Zarin concluded a debriefing session with human scientists. He found a moment of quiet reflection in the corridor, thinking back on the empire he once admired. They had formed an interstellar dominion on the premise that their technology and might were second to none. He wondered if a seed of humility had been planted in those who managed to escape. He also wondered if one day diplomacy could eclipse warfare so that no civilization would attempt the same reckless conquest again. Perhaps it was naive to believe so, but he couldn't help hoping. He gazed out a window overlooking the snowy peaks in the distance, and though the stark cold made him shiver, he marveled that humans lived comfortably there. Evolution, adaptation, culture, it all coalesced into a species that, despite internal conflicts and limitations, had defied an empire. A planet had triumphed through thousands of microclimates, turned into natural fortresses. At dawn, back at the desert outpost, cleanup crews continued hauling away debris from the fallen dome. Carla's earlier sabotage had left it in shards of composite materials. Among the workers was Luis, the desert tracker. He paused, holding up a fragment of alien metal etched with unfamiliar script. In the morning light, he traced the lines with a finger and felt a pang of wonder. These words, he supposed, might say something about the glory of the Arisian Empire, yet the shard lay broken in the sand, dwarfed by dunes that would eventually bury it altogether. Luis shielded his eyes from the rising sun, thinking of the battles fought here. He remembered how a single storm conjured by nature, guided only a bit by human hands, had achieved what bombs and bullets could not. Setting the shard aside, he rose to join the other workers, fully aware that the desert would reclaim everything given enough time. The land had been there long before any empire. It would remain long after. Weeks turned into months. Humanity set about repairing minor damages left by the conflict. But the cosmic scars ran deeper. Astronomers reported that the Eretzian fleet had regrouped at the edge of the solar system before departing. Nothing more was detected of them. Carla sometimes dreamt of a future confrontation, a day when the Eretzians or another alien civilization might come better prepared for Earth's environment. Her dreams were filled with swirling storms, roiling seas, and the roar of avalanche-prone mountains. In every dream, Earth responded to the threat just as decisively. On a brisk evening, Carla strolled across a quiet field near her old home, looking up at the stars. Each twinkle might be a distant sun orbited by unknown worlds. The notion was no longer abstract to her. She had stood face to face with visitors from out there. She understood that if humankind continued to flourish, they might one day journey beyond their solar system. She hoped they would remember how crucial it was to respect any environment they encountered. After all, that lesson had proven to be Earth's greatest gift and the Arisians' downfall. She recalled a single phrase from the early news reports that sprang up when the lights were first seen. They thought they were invincible until they landed on Earth. The phrase had circulated with dramatic flair in tabloid headlines, but it turned out to encapsulate the truth. The Arsians had believed their technology made them unstoppable. The planet's raw power disabused them of that notion. Carla exhaled into the cool night air, letting a sense of calm wash over her. If the Eretzians ever did return, or if another threat arrived, the blueprint for victory was already written in the planet's swirling deserts, jagged peaks, lush forests, and icy poles. Earth was formidable, its defenders tested and ready. And if there was a secret moral to be gleaned, it was that synergy with nature could outweigh technological might. Where advanced suits and climate domes faltered, thousands of years of adaptation thrived. Earth required neither mercy nor pity, only respect. Deprived of that, even the mightiest invaders would fall. In that silent, starlit field, Carla felt the beating heart of her world. She felt it in the wind, in the soil, in the distant hum of life. She closed her eyes and imagined the future. No matter what it held, she was certain that Earth, ever shifting, ever resilient, would always rise to meet the challenge. Then she lifted her gaze once more to the sky, to the countless stars overhead, wondering who might be watching and whether they had learned the lesson that the Arisians had learned so painfully. You may travel across galaxies with unstoppable power, but never forget that the simplest elements, wind, water, cold, heat, can become insurmountable foes if you do not seek harmony with the world on which you choose to set foot.